The wind cut through the county storage yard like a rusted blade, sharp and uncaring. Evan Carter pulled his worn hoodie tighter around his shoulders, trying to shield his little sister from the late autumn chill. At 19, he carried the kind of weary, overburdened responsibility most grown men never had to face. Beside him, 13-year-old Lucy bounced on her toes, trying to stay warm, her thin ponytail flicking behind her like a stubborn flag. They didn't belong here, not among the loud voices, steaming coffee cups, and people chasing after other people's forgotten junk. They were only here because the pickup truck they lived in was parked nearby, and the crowd offered a momentary distraction from the quiet, gnawing ache of being young, broke, and invisible. "Why are we even watching?" Evan muttered. Lucy shrugged. "It's fun. Makes me feel like normal people do this." Normal people. Evan didn't remember the last time either of them fit that description. The auctioneer slapped the metal door of Unit 47. "All right, folks, start me at $10. And then Lucy's hand shot up. Evan's heart jumped into his throat. "Lucy, what are you doing?" A few bystanders chuckled. The auctioneer grinned at her boldness. $10, do I hear 15? Before Evan could pull her arm down, a man raised his hand. 15, the man barked. Again, Lucy lifted her hand, playfully, innocently, recklessly hopeful. 20, the auctioneer asked. Silence. And just like that, the gavel slammed down with a metallic thud. "Sold to the young lady in the blue jacket." Evan froze. His stomach tightened with anxious disbelief. They barely had $10 between them, maybe 12 if he counted the loose change in the glove compartment. Lucy looked up at him, suddenly sheepish, suddenly aware of what she'd done. I thought someone else would bid," she whispered. Her voice trembled, the kind of soft vulnerability that made Evan's frustration melt, even when he didn't want it to. They approached the unit as the manager unlocked it. The door screeched upward, revealing piles of sagging boxes, torn upholstery, and a heavy smell of dust. "It's all trash," Evan murmured. But Lucy stepped forward, curious, bright-eyed, quietly optimistic, pointing toward a wooden trunk buried under a faded blanket. "Evan, what if it's not?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead, caught between exhaustion and fragile hope. "All right," he said, "let's see what $15 bought us." And without knowing it, they stood at the edge of a story that would rewrite everything they believed about their past, their future, and themselves. Evan knelt beside the wooden trunk, brushing away layers of dust that clung to the surface like time itself refused to let go. The blanket covering it was brittle, torn at the edges, and smelled faintly of old cedar and rain-soaked paper. Lucy hovered over his shoulder, curious, bright, and quietly brave-hearted despite the cold biting at her fingers. "Think it's locked?" she asked. Evan tugged at the metal latch. It popped open with a tired sigh, the kind of sound that carried nostalgia and forgotten stories. Inside lay items that didn't match the rest of the unit's junk. A neatly folded American flag, a heavy metal tin filled with black and white photographs, a cracked leather journal, and a strange silver cylinder wrapped in canvas. Evan lifted the journal first. The cover was stiff and fragile, like it might crumble if handled without kindness. "Careful," Lucy whispered. "I know," he answered, though his hands were already trembling with wary anticipation. He flipped the journal open. The handwriting was elegant, sharp, almost scientific. March 4th, 1952. Prototype complete. If approved, the St. Louis line will change everything. Beneath the entry was a sketch of a sleek train, streamlined in a way Evan had never seen before. Half machine, half dream. Page after page documented formulas, diagrams, notes on magnetic propulsion, and detailed test reports. Each entry was signed. Ashrin Amatir. Harold Denton. Lucy leaned in closer, her voice soft with awe. "Evan, this looks important. Like really important." He nodded. "Yeah, but important doesn't pay for gas." Still, something in the way the journal was written, so deliberate, so full of belief, stirred something in him, a kind of quiet respect he didn't understand yet. Lucy reached into the trunk and pulled out the silver cylinder. "What's this?" Evan turned it over in his hands, feeling its weight. Along the side were engraved words. Magnetic propulsion test. A chill ran through him, not from the air, but from the strange sense that they'd crossed into something bigger than bad luck and borrowed trucks. "Look at this," Lucy said, pointing at a small note tucked in the back of the journal. Written in a different handwriting, finer and lighter, were two simple initials, MH. Lucy blinked. Evan, that's our last name. He swallowed hard, fighting the swirl of confusion, disbelief, and reluctant hope rising inside him. Maybe it means nothing, he muttered. But Lucy shook her head, intuitive and unafraid. Or maybe it means everything. And for the first time in months, Evan felt the ground shift. Not in fear, but in possibility. Evan didn't sleep much that night. The journal sat on the dashboard of the pickup, illuminated by the dim glow of a street lamp. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the sketches. Sleek trains gliding without touching the tracks. Handwritten equations looping across yellowed pages. It felt unreal. Too big. Too dangerous. Too hopeful. Lucy, on the other hand, buzzed with energy. It means something, Evan. I can feel it, she said the next morning, her voice bright, intuitive, and determined. Evan rubbed the back of his neck. We don't even know where to start. Turned out the universe, or maybe fate, handled that part for them. At a gas station outside town, an older mailman with kind, weathered eyes tapped on their truck window. Y'all the kids who bought that storage unit? He asked. Evan stiffened, instantly cautious, protective. Why? The man shrugged. That unit belonged to Harold Denton's grandson. Folks used to whisper that Denton built something the government didn't want getting out. Then he nodded west. Old rail depot out past Route 9. Boards are loose, if you're curious. And just like that, he walked away. Lucy exhaled sharply. Evan, we have to go. He wanted to say no. His instincts were screaming with anxious responsibility. But something in the journal, in the initials MH, pushed back against his fear. By afternoon, they were standing before the abandoned depot. The building sagged beneath years of disrepair. Broken windows looked like tired eyes staring at a world that forgot them. Graffiti coated the walls. Weeds clawed through the cracks of the foundation. Inside smelled like rust and old memories. They followed the narrow track of a single rusted rail straight into the belly of the building until a massive shape under a torn canvas loomed ahead like a sleeping beast. Lucy grabbed the edge of the tarp and tugged. The fabric slipped away, revealing a half-size experimental locomotive, its paint blistered but proud, its design almost identical to Denton's sketches. 3 stenciled letters stretched across the side. MPR1, Lucy whispered, it's real. Evan climbed into the cab, his pulse loud in his ears. The controls were dusty but intact. And at the center of the console was a circular socket, precisely the size of the silver cylinder in Lucy's hands. Evan, she said, breathless. He swallowed hard. 1,000 thoughts, fear, excitement, disbelief, responsibility, collided inside him. Let's try it, Lucy urged, her voice soft but fearless. Evan hesitated only a heartbeat before fitting the cylinder into place. A faint click, a deep hum. The floor shivered as if the air itself remembered how to move. Lucy gripped his sleeve. It's waking up. And Evan knew their lives had just crossed a line neither of them could step back from. Evan didn't remember leaving the depot. Only the echo of that low, electric hum trailing after them, like a ghost they couldn't outrun. The cylinder stayed wrapped in Lucy's flannel shirt as they drove back to town, both siblings silent, overwhelmed, and apprehensive about what they had awakened. By morning, Evan made a decision he hoped he wouldn't regret. He called the only person who might understand the magnitude of what they'd found. Dr. Evelyn Nolan met them in a cramped office inside the State Museum, its walls cluttered with railroad maps, sepia photographs, and stacks of carefully labeled blueprints. She was sharp-eyed, perceptive, and carried a quiet authority that made even Evan, usually guarded and cautious, feel strangely safe. Lucy placed the cylinder on the desk. Dr. Nolan drew in a slow, astonished breath. This shouldn't exist outside federal archives, she whispered. Evan shifted uneasily. We found a train in an old depot, and your name was in the archives of the journal we found. She examined the cylinder with gentle reverence, her voice softening. Magnetic propulsion, Denton's early prototype. Rumors said it could lift itself off the tracks, decades before anyone believed such a thing was possible. Politics killed it. Fear buried it. Lucy leaned forward, eyes bright with intuitive excitement. So it was real? All of it? Oh, it was real, Nolan said. Too real, too advanced, too threatening to the industries that ran America in the 1950s. She lifted the journal next. Harold Denton didn't work alone. Look, here. She turned the pages to a faded patent draft at the back. Two names were listed: Harold Denton, Margaret Harper. Lucy's breath hitched. Evan, that's Grandma's name. Shock punched him in the chest. Heavy, emotional, disorienting. His grandmother, the woman who raised them until the day she died, had been part of something extraordinary. Something the world had been forced to forget. Dr. Nolan looked at them with a kind of steady, compassionate admiration. You two brought history back to life, and you deserve to know the truth. Word spread faster than Evan expected. Reporters showed up at the museum. People whispered about the Carter kids who uncovered a lost American invention. For the first time in a long time, strangers didn't look at them with pity. They looked with wonder. But attention came with shadows. A black SUV sat across from the museum for hours. A man in a pressed coat watched the depot from behind darkened windows. And one night, Evan returned to find an envelope taped to the truck door. Things that float can also fall. Don't play with what you don't understand. Evan's hands trembled as he folded the note. Lucy touched his arm, gentle, fearless, intuitive. We're not backing down, she said softly. He looked at her, the last bit of childhood still clinging to her brave face. No, Evan whispered, we're not. But inside, he felt something shift. A quiet certainty that the discovery that could change their lives might also put them in danger. The restoration of the MPR-1 took weeks, longer than Evan expected, shorter than he feared. Every morning, he and Lucy walked into the abandoned depot-turned-workshop with the same mixture of determined hope and quiet anxiety, like they were stepping into a living piece of their own family history. And in a way, they were. State engineers, historians, volunteers from town, and Dr. Nolan all gathered around the half-repaired locomotive each day. Evan, still technically homeless a month ago, now worked beside professionals who treated him like a colleague, not a charity project. Lucy, small but bright-eyed and perceptive, recorded test notes and asked questions the adults often couldn't answer. And through it all, the cylinder remained locked away in a steel case, the heart of the machine, the spark of a lost American dream. One stormy evening, Dr. Nolan rested a hand on the polished side of the engine. Tomorrow, she said softly, we complete what Denton and Margaret Harper started. Lucy smiled, courageous and hopeful. Grandma would love this. Evan swallowed hard. Yeah, she really would. The next day, the depot was buzzing. Reporters gathering outside, town officials fussing, engineers prepping instruments. But inside, at the center of the chaos, Evan felt something strangely calm, purposeful, like all the broken pieces of his life had somehow found their way into place. Dr. Nolan lifted the cylinder with reverent hands. Evan, she said, you should do it. His breath caught. Me? You and your sister finished what your grandmother began. You deserve this moment. Lucy squeezed his hand, gentle, proud, steadfast. Evan stepped forward. His heart pounded with a mixture of fear and belonging he'd never felt before. He slid the cylinder into the socket. A click. Silence. Then, a deep, powerful hum rolled through the floor, vibrating in their bones. Lights flickered along the dashboard. Blue-white energy pulsed through the engine's wiring like veins awakening. Reporters gasped. Engineers stumbled back. The MPR-1 trembled, glowed, and slowly, almost impossibly, lifted 1 full inch off the rails, hovering in midair. The room erupted into shouts, laughter, tears. Lucy covered her mouth, shaking. Dr. Nolan wiped her eyes. For a moment, even the air felt stunned, as if the past and present were holding their breath together. Evan stared at the floating machine, overwhelmed. This is real, he whispered. Dr. Nolan nodded. Your grandmother changed American history once. Today you finished her work. The hum pulsed like a heartbeat, alive, vindicated, home. They powered down the engine before it overwhelmed the room, but the electricity in the air, the emotional kind, lingered long after the machine settled back onto the track. Within hours, the news spread statewide. By evening, the governor declared March 4th Innovation Remembrance Day, officially honoring Harold Denton and Margaret Harper. 2 names that almost vanished forever, restored by 2 kids nobody believed in. A week later, Evan and Lucy moved into a small rental house provided by the museum. It wasn't big, but it was warm, safe, and theirs. For the first time in years, Lucy had her own bed. Evan had a mailbox. They had hope that didn't feel like a lie. Life didn't magically become perfect, but it became possible. One night, sitting on the porch under a wide American sky, Lucy asked, "Evan, do you think Grandma knows what we did?" He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, protective and tender-hearted. "I think she never stopped believing in us. And now the world finally gets to see why." The depot hummed faintly in the distance, the sound of old dreams refusing to die. If you discovered a forgotten invention that could change the world, but also put you in danger, what would you do? Would you protect it or walk away to keep your family safe? If this story touched your heart and you want to hear more emotional, life-changing journeys like this, hit the subscribe button now so you never miss the next chapter. Your support helps keep stories like this alive.